Since we're going to be talking about spiritualism and ghosts today, I thought it appropriate to leave this shirt on. Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I want to be giving some thoughts and opinions and reasons behind reading The Quickening by Rhiannon Ward. Rhiannon Ward is the pseudonym of Sarah Ward, author of the DC Connie Child series that starts with In Bitter Chill. I have been lucky enough to previously be on an author panel with the author, and she has proven to be an incredibly gracious human being who also happens to have a blog. If you know crime pieces, then you will know that the author has done their work when it comes to knowing the crime genre. This book begins in England 1925. Louisa is tasked with going and taking photographs for her employer of Clewer Hall. The family are moving to India, as many aristocratic families did in the time. The house is in a state of disrepair and the family has never recovered after losing their 3 sons during the First World War. Immediately when Louisa arrives as a pregnant woman, people begin to behave weirdly towards her, and you know that it's all related to a séance that happened 30 years previously that the matriarch of this family has chosen to recreate in the hopes of getting some more answers as to what Ada, the medium, said 30 years ago, whether everything she said was based on being a medium or was it all based on lies and deception. Did any of the tragedies that befell the family happen because of what Ada said? I'm going to put this book down for a second whilst I give some background as to why I happen to be interested in the book. So, The Quickening deals with the spiritualist movement, and it features Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a spiritualist and whose wife was believed to do automatic handwriting, where they scribble across a page, few words come out, sentences and stuff, and they supposedly came from the spirit world. My interest in this book wasn't just founded on the fact that I know the writer. When my great-grandmother moved to Congleton, her sister became a spiritualist minister, and indeed that branch of my family tree were very invested in the spiritualist movement and the spiritualist church. They had a huge problem with fake mediums, and indeed my mother still tells a story from the 1970s when the church had invited someone to come and speak to the congregation, I don't know what you call them, and this person began asking my mother loads of questions that were related to lost relatives, but it was all in order to try and gain something to then use in the service afterwards, because it would look good for the for this medium they'd invited to talk to the niece of the minister for the spiritualist church in Congleton. It's not necessarily a part of my family tree that I'm protective over. I don't have many religious beliefs myself. I will say it colours how you're raised as a child, and it colours the way you are taught to believe, because obviously I went to a school that had no religious aspect to it, but we were taught Church of England stuff, and I know that it then came with this whole thing of my mother being raised as a spiritualist then lent itself to how I was raised, because then you're raised to question more things, and you're always told, well, I was always told, as my siblings were, the Bible is just a storybook. And so from a young age, my mother was more about raising people without religion, just knowing that it was there. How does this come into the book, mind you? Another aspect of the spiritualist church, just to talk about it as I know. So in this book, there are a lot of, I wouldn't say non-believers, but there are people who question everything and they want to call Ada a charlatan. Indeed, it seems that whole reason she has been invited to recreate this seance from 30 years before is because people don't believe she can actually commune with spirits. The reader is left to question whether that happened because Louisa does seem to be having some paranormal experiences. That is why Helen, the matriarch who wants to recreate this seance, is very interested in Louisa. That idea of questioning spiritualism, I went into this wondering whether this was going to be a book that wanted to call the spiritualist movement fake and it was going to criticise it, or were we going to have a book that really went into the nitty-gritties of it? Going back to the 1940s or 50s, well, there still is space in the Congleton Chronicle where people can write about religion and religious passages and their beliefs. And my auntie, during the 50s, was given this opportunity. This sparked off a war of words in the Congleton Chronicle because a week later there was a gentleman who had decided to label my Auntie Wynne a devil worshipper. Now, when I found these letters as in my late teens, I was completely shocked, but also found the idea hilarious, because if anyone knew my Auntie Wynne, she was the most mild-mannered, polite woman I have ever had the bliss and blessing to meet. I suppose that could be said for a lot of my older family members on my mum's side. They had a quiet respectability about them and did lend me the belief that even if you absolutely despise someone, we can still be kind. To read that and see how she was spoken of in the paper gave me an idea of what people actually thought of spiritualists, because naturally I am over here with barely any beliefs left in life. I have no sort of religious leanings at all, and I am fine with that. I'm happy with that. I have no problem to say that. I know that there'll be odd times here and there where I'll talk about signs and all that, but for the most part, it's just because that's kind of, I think, the way everyone works. Our culture is that steeped in not just religion but folklore, and it lends itself to our vernacular. But I say all of this and I give this context because I didn't know what I was going to get with the Quickening, and I'll admit to some trepidation that this book might be inadvertently offensive. Now, like I say, I don't care about people offending religion or disliking it, but for whatever reason, I'm not protective of religion, but there was something in me that was a bit trepidatious. Still not sure if that's a word, but I'm coining it. My fears were unfounded, but I think this book is simply good. Firstly, I will mention the protagonist, Louisa. It's a first-person narrative. She's the one telling the story, but I kept forgetting she had a name. I could not remember that this woman was Louisa. She did not feel like a character. Despite the fact the story is told in her voice, it felt very much like a straightforward tale with no voice, no colour, nothing there to kind of show the type of woman that Louisa was. We're told that she lost her husband and her 2 sons in the war, that she doesn't love her current husband, but she needed a husband to get by in the world, and she was desperate for another baby. She did not care whether she loved the man she married to acquire that baby. That means that there should be some sensation of grief, or I should be able to feel something through the way in which this character speaks. This book should be chilling because it's supposed to be this gothic tale of the supernatural, possibly. There should be this tension there because we are questioning if Ada is able to communicate with the spirit world, then there is this question of, is this family really cursed? And if she's not, who the heck is committing murder in this book? And there should be tension because of that, but there isn't any tension. Indeed, what I felt with this book was it had links to the 13th tale, in that it's this woman being employed to go and help reveal the secrets of this family. There is talk of possible ghosts, but I did end up finding the book extremely predictable. It hits notes, you know, it hits all of the notes that a book like this should hit. It does it in a relatively short manner, but it felt like there was no atmosphere, and there should have been for the story that was being told. It felt very polished, as though the writer had gone through and removed any colour from the story so that it was just straightforward. And this happened, then this happened. Dialogue to tell the story that has happened and gone before. We got portions of third person that went back 30 years, and they helped the reader to put together the mystery and solve it for themselves. When it actually came to solving everything in the end, it was just a case of a character who'd been there 30 years before coming forward and telling the story as it was, and that's very much how it felt then. It felt like a story that was being told and we were hearing in a very passive way. There are tons of characters at this house, but none of them felt individual, and I couldn't separate them from each other. None of them had individual voices. Despite this book being only 323 pages, the story doesn't really begin until the 150-page mark, when this recreation of the seance is happening. When a character called George arrives, the story could even begin there. I don't really know what the first 150 pages are there for. It seems like a really long setup, and even at page 300 was setting up things. If certain elements of the story had been removed, then it would have given us more of a linear narrative. It could have focused on something. But I feel like how I felt about other books in the past, where the author perhaps hasn't wanted to offend or give an opinion, so they just become almost scientific about it, and they say there's the possibility that this character has seen spirits and experienced the paranormal, but this character over here could be a charlatan. It edges around it. Maybe we don't need definitive answers. Maybe if the storytelling had been better, then I could have coped. I felt whilst reading this, because I'd see some moments of genius and some great pieces of writing in here that really disappointed me then about the rest of the book and not liking the rest of the book. And again, it's not that I didn't like the book. It's that it is a one and done type book. It's a good book. It does what it's supposed to do, but it lacked in so many ways. There wasn't great storytelling, and there wasn't great craft, and it was very just, we're hitting this point, we're done. As I say, we could cut the first 150 pages and we'd still have a great story. Moments of tension needed to be raised. There needed to be better atmospheric moments. Just saying that fog's there is not enough to make me feel these chills that I'm looking for in a supernatural gothic book. And I think because it's also a genre that I quite like, a story where there is possible touches of the supernatural. Like, I read this and I was thinking of The Silent Companions. Even The Corset. I didn't care for The Corset because I felt like it was too much like The Silent Companions. But The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell is a brilliant evocation of the Gothic novel. And yes, there are bits where it hits the points that it's supposed to hit. But there's great... It's the storytelling, it's the action, it's the feeling that it makes the reader feel. And I didn't feel anything in this story. I didn't feel for the characters. I guessed everywhere this story would go. It was predictable, and there was a very Hollywood ending that didn't sit right with me. Alongside all that, I did feel as though this book, since it did focus so heavily on dialogue and didn't really have much action going on in there, it could have worked better as a radio play. And I could see this being turned into maybe an hour to 2 hour long radio play. That would have perhaps worked better because the dialogue is there. Like I say, it's a very dialogue heavy book with little atmosphere, little action, but it does everything it's set out to do. Unfortunately for me, I didn't like it. And it is unfortunate for me because I really respect the author. I prefer their mystery novels. I know she's a great thriller writer from the DC Connie Child series. I don't understand why this book isn't better, but I know why it didn't do it for me. Like I say, I don't see this as a brilliant book. I see it as simply good. I see so many areas for improvement. Yet I think that if you're looking for a light gothic thriller, then you might like this. Indeed, the entire time I was thinking, I can guess people who would like the book. And like I say, I did like the book. I just feel like there are people who will appreciate this book more than I did, because to me, it's just very mundane, very prosaic, and it's adding nothing new. I don't think books have to add something new every time if they have an individual voice, and this lacked an individual voice for me. I think, as I say, cut the first 150 pages, maybe ease off on editing yourself so much so that whilst your lines might be perfect and they might be what you're taught to do as a creative writer, sometimes it's all right to have an individual voice filled with idiosyncrasies, and I think I would have appreciated that more. Ultimately, it sits in the middle for me. It's not bad, it's not brilliant, I didn't hate it, and I will still read anything that Sarah Ward puts out, because that's what we do when we want to support our writerly acquaintances, whether or not we care for their work. Have you read this book? If you have, then please feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Did you like my little bit of family history at the start? If by any means you got offended by this video, please forward all mail to the gates of hell. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.